to the Fruity Knitting Podcast. This is episode 19. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Andrea.
We've got a great show coming up today. Our guest on Knitters of the World is Leah Ball, who's coming to us from Sunnyvale, California, which is a great sounding place as we move into winter.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So Leah is a knitting fashionista, and she's going to share with us today her love of couture knitting. And then we've got a really lovely interview with the grande dame of knitting, and that is Deborah Newton. Deborah Newton worked as an editor and a designer for Vogue Knitting for many, many years. And in the last few years, Vogue Knitting has published 2 of her books. And they are accumulation of the wealth of knowledge and experience that she's had in her years of working in the industry. So you should really enjoy listening to her speak. And then I'm going to tell you how I reknitted the blossoms on my blossom by Marie Wallin. And Andrew has done some significant progress on his hiking jacket.
Yep, so that's a lot to look forward to. What are we starting with, Dales?
Bring and brag.
Yeah.
Finished objects. For new viewers, I've been working on this lovely design, which is called Blossom by Marie Wallin, for a few weeks now. And in the last episode, I had already knitted up to the rose section, and I was talking to you about how I was going to reknit this section. This next section here is done in Intarsia. Well, I have done that, and I'm completely happy with the results. So I'm going to show you and tell you a bit more about that first. But for new viewers, the construction is knitted in the round bottom up. Same with the sleeves, and then you attach it all together at the yoke, and you do the ferrule section here, and then it's straight into the Intarsia section. So the Intarsia section here is divided up. It's got 5 rose blossoms on it. 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5 on the back. And we've got 5 decrease lines, so in between the roses. So 1, 2, 1 just here, 1 there, and 1 centre back. And the row starts and ends at the centre back. So normally you'd be knitting in the round like this. And what I did, I wasn't happy with how that turned out for me because there was a lot of puckering going on. It was because you can see there's a lot of different colours are being used. It was very hard to avoid messy, either sloppy stitches or puckering happening all around the edges. So what I decided to do was to knit it in the flat. So I ripped back down to the ferrule section here, and at the centre back, which is the start and the end of the row, I kept that seam open, and then I knitted around and purled back. And that was so much easier. The results were way better. But
that was a good idea, Dales.
It was. Why, do you think you came up with it?
Yeah.
No, you didn't?
It was my idea to do it down the back, yeah.
It was.
It was, see? It was.
Andrew does come up with some great engineering feats.
So often.
Yes, my first idea was I would just do each panel and then mattress stitch up each, which is a completely stupid idea. And then you said, well, why don't you just do it once up the back, which is absolutely logical. Yeah. Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. Now, it's a little bit hard for you to see exactly what was the problem and what I did to fix it. So I've made a 6-minute video for you where you can see up close. So I'll see you in 6 minutes' time, and hopefully you'll have a better understanding of what I did. This is my Blossom by Marie Wallin. And I was having trouble with the yoke section, which is knitted in Intarsia, and it's knitted in the round. So I was finding that my roses were very puckered and uneven around the outside and around the leaves here. So I ripped back completely down to this ferrule section, and I've reknitted it. And I've reknitted it in the flat. I'll just explain that first. So if you can see the roses here, between each one there is a line of decrease. And this is the front section, and if I turn it over, you will see the back section has now got a split in it. So normally it's just knitted with the beginning and the ending of the row is centre back, and you knit around and around and around like this. So I will explain to you why later, but I decided it was better for me to knit it in the flat. So I simply just kept this decrease panel here open. So you can see there's another decrease panel there and another one here. So now I just knit around and then I purl back. Knit around and purl back. So the problem with doing Intarsia in the round is that you often don't have the colour that you want to use where you want it on the following row. So if you can see that there's many different colours here. So if we just take the middle of the rows, we've got pink, and then we've got purple, then we've got pink again, we've got a bit of purple, we've got red, we've got pink, and then we've got light purple. So there's all these different, that's just in this section. And if we go along further, we've got light green, dark green, orange, and pink again. So normally you would have for every section a thread, and that's where all of these come in. So I would have a pink thread here, a purple thread here, another pink one here for those stitches, another purple one, a red one, a pink one, and a purple one. Now I have cheated a little bit. I've got a lot of threads, as you can see, but I don't have quite that many. So what normally happens is, just say I'm starting here and I'm knitting across using pink, and I change here on this row to red. I leave my pink strand here, I twist it around the red one, and I continue on to knit red, and then I change colours accordingly. On my second row, when I'm here, I'm wanting to knit with pink, but the end of my pink is actually left here. So it means that I have to take the thread, make it a float, and bring it all the way back up here for me to knit with it again. So I could either do that, or I could have two pink ones, and so I only knit to that part and leave the thread hanging, change to purple, and then have another thread here just for 2 stitches. That means you can end up increasing your threads by triple what you normally have, and I've already got a lot. But you can't get away from having to double your thread back or pull your thread back to be in the right place where it needs to be. And what that tends to do is pull these outside stitches in and cause some puckering. It's very hard to get that flat. But if you do it if you knit in the flat, which means that you knit and then you purl back, you'll find that your thread is where it's meant to be. So if I start here on the pink and I knit across to the red yarn, I drop the pink, twist it around the red, continue on to knit with the red and onwards. When I purl backwards and I'm ready to knit on to purl on the next row, my pink yarn is hanging there waiting for me. So I just pick it up and purl back. So it does cut out a lot of floats. And if I put my hand underneath here, you can see, particularly down here in the green, it's actually very flat now. It's lying very smooth and flat, which I'm really happy with, and here as well. When I had done it in the round before, these were puckering a bit. They'd sort of bubble a bit like this, and the white background stitches on either side were either loose or they looked a lot more uneven. If I show you the back of this rose here, you can see that it's all woven in and it's really quite flat. There's no big floats. You've got long strands that have to be cut off and woven in, but here there's occasional floats. There's a float and there's a float. But apart from that, they're all woven in. That keeps the fabric sort of more stable. I did these roses along the hem in the round. And when I turn it inside out, you can see I have longer floats. That worked fine because they're only small and there wasn't so many colours. So you can see there's not too much puckering on the outside. But when I first of all did it here, there was a lot of puckering. You can see that that's pretty loose here because it's just one column of knit stitches. So that I'm hoping to be able to tighten up when I weave in the ends. But I had a lot more of that, particularly down around these areas, and that's a lot flatter now. So I'm very happy. Welcome back. I hope that video was useful or you found it interesting to see exactly what I did, what the problem was, and my thought process on it. I've made 2 extra short videos which are available for our patrons, and that's on how I read the charts and how I managed all my yarns. So how I knitted the Intarsia and managed the yarns on the knit side, and then when I turned it around and purled back and manage the yarns. So that's available for the patrons now on the Patreon site. And I want to talk a little bit more about some other things that I did. If I put here a picture of the original design, you'll see that mine is slightly different in the fact that mine is more of a fitted, I've made mine more fitted than the original design. That actually meant I had to make some changes, because you'll also see that my roses sit higher on my yoke than in the original. So when you are making something more fitted, you do have to be a lot more exact about the fitting. It shows up more, because the first thing I noticed was that the length from my shoulder to my underarm was going to be shorter. Because if you can see, if this is body hugging here, I can't, if it wasn't body hugging and it was just coming out here, then I've got a lot more fudge room as to how deep my armpit is going to be.
Armhole, yeah.
Okay, but I can't have it too low there with it being body fitting. So I re-knitted my blossoms, and then I kept knitting, and I soon saw that the decreases just weren't going to work. So I had to pull back again the top 6 centimetres just of the stocking stitch and redo some decreases, which I just did by trial and error till I found that it worked nice and flatly here. So you can see that I've got less of the background sort of grey colour from the top of between the top of my roses and my green collar than in the design. What I also did was put in short rows at the back so that the back of my neck would sit higher, because even though the front and the back is absolutely equal, visually it would have looked as if the front was higher and the back lower. And so I did the short rows, and that has helped that. And I also realised, because we had a very quick discussion in the last episode about how bust size changes your fitting techniques, and normally being relatively flat-chested has worked in my advantage, but I think in this case it was a little bit against me, because when you have a larger bust you actually need more material in the front than you do in the back. So it became more necessary for me to put the short rows in, particularly when it's fitted. If I was a little bit larger, then it would have just naturally pulled down the front more than what it did. So that's interesting to understand construction types and body shapes and putting them together. But the expert on this is Deborah Newton, who's got a lot to say about that. And I've been reading her books and learning things, so it's interesting to compare things that, what we talked about in the interview, and seeing me working on items and seeing how that works.
Yep.
Hi, my name is Leah Ball, otherwise known as Yarn Stylist. And I learned knitting in college. There was a wonderful German woman who taught me how to knit because she wanted someone to keep her company. And that was really great, because we would sit side by side knitting together in the evenings. And so there was always someone ready to help, which is a really fantastic way to learn how to knit. But I think the reason I really became so interested in becoming a textile artist was just because of my grandmother. She grew up on a small farm in East Texas where she had to sew all of her own clothing. And I think because of that, she became really interested in textiles. I came to visit her in the summers, and, it was just like being surrounded by all of these beautiful fabrics. I mean, even her sofa was this jade green sofa, and this kind of Asian-inspired motifs of exotic birds and flowers. because of that, I guess I just really have always loved the idea of being able to make beautiful things, but then wear them so that they're always with you. And for me, because I'm kind of a frustrated textile designer, I'm not really as interested in creating a shape. I just tend to use knitting designs that are made by other people so that I have the freedom to really focus on the fabric. The jacket that I'm wearing is designed by Kim Hargreaves, who's a wonderful British classic knitwear designer. This piece is called Honored. I saw in the Lagerfeld Chanel, this was the cruise collection that he had in Korea last year, and there was this lilac tweed that was so bold and audacious and feminine that I was just totally captivated by it, and I wanted to create my own. So I set out, and I started with this base color. This is Rowan Felted Tweed. And I really wanted to find another lilac that could go with it, but that didn't have any pink in it at all. And believe me, it was very, very difficult to find. But I finally got my hands on the Swan's Island Merino, which is just fabulous. And so I paired those together for this slip stitch pattern. And then for the metallic sparkle, I combined the silver yarn with an organic silk tweed. And I think it's really important when you work with metallic yarns to combine them with other things to kind of keep the silver from looking tacky, or the gold, or whatever it is. I do knit a lot with metallic yarns, and you can see, you know, something like this Rowan Shine or this Fildar. I mean, it's a very, very bright brash color, and it you know, if you combine it with something that has a halo and something that's in a duller color, it creates a really beautiful balance. So this is an example of a Rowan pattern, Madame Butterfly, that I knitted with the combination of the two of them to make it work. This beautiful Kim Hargreaves jacket, the design is called Touch. And you can see I just brought in a little hint of silver as one of the accent stripes for this pattern. Another example is Kim Hargreaves jacket Wren. And this uses felted tweed Aran. It's kind of a rough denim colored tweed. So it can really kind of take the accent of silver well, and I think it creates a beautiful balance. I crocheted this silver on using Anchor Artiste Metallic after I knitted each piece. So I kind of did it as I went along, and I experimented. And I really love the way that this jacket turned out. This is my own design, and I called this Gabrielle after Chanel. I was really inspired by Lagerfeld's 2012 couture fashion show. It was the fall-winter couture fashion show for Chanel in 2012, and there were just these beautiful, beautiful light pinks and lights, you know, light grays, and everything, like the fabrics just looked so angelic that I really wanted to create my own version for myself that I could wear. So I combined about 8 or 9 different yarns and, you know, swatched with like a million different things until I came up with this combination that I really like. You can see if you look inside here, all of the different threads and yarns that went into creating this. That's just kind of what I love to do. Another approach I take to creating couture style knitwear is to bring in beading. And this is Martin Story's Semillon. I used some rather large Swarovski crystals as the embellishment. Rowan did a partnership with Swarovski last year, and these are 6mm crystal beads, so they're actually quite large. And I just think they bring a wonderful sparkle. And something too that I think is really great is that the beads are just an accent. They're not all over the whole piece. I really believe strongly that if you're going to use beads, you should match them to your fabric so that, you know, especially if you're wearing a light fabric, you know, you can look like you suddenly came down with the measles with all of these little dots all over you. You know, if you kind of match the colors, then it just gives this wonderful sparkle without being too much. And if you just use the beading in strategic places, it won't create the weight that distorts so many all over beaded fabrics. So I really love this one. Another sweater that I really love is called Osaka, and this was designed by Sarah Hatton. And again, for me, it was just kind of all about the color combination. I do work a lot with kid silkays because I think it's really delicate and creates kind of a fragile beauty to the fabrics. This is again something you could just kind of throw on with jeans and wear out to work and you know, feel like there's this, you know, this sort of secret that you have, which is that you're wearing this beautiful piece that you made yourself in the midst of all the mundane things that go on with life. This is Emerald Blocks by Jean Frost. And I took Jean Frost's class on how to line a knitted jacket. So this is, the silk lining is quilted to the body of the fabric. This is Elizabeth by Kim Hargreaves. It's all knitted in one piece, so it's a self-fashioned collar, which is a really neat design. This is my adaptation of Kim Hargreaves' pattern Steed, and I brought in some really deep, warm tones for the plaid and metallic tones in the stripes and the sleeves of the jacket to make it more couture, but I really love this pattern. This is Rain by Kim Hargreaves. It's knitted in felted tweed. This is the Dinky Pool by Annie Blatt. I knitted this in a combination of Angora Haze and Kid Silk Haze, which are both Rowan yarns, and kept the sleeves sheer. This is Light, designed by Kim Hargreaves, and I modified this by bringing in a metallic yarn, Anchor Artiste Metallic Fine, which I combined with Kid Silk Haze, and then I found some Chanel buttons and added them to the sweater. This is Striven by Jenny Atkinson, and I think this is really fabulous. It's a motorcycle jacket that creates a plaid pattern by using duplicate stitch to create the vertical stripes, and I modified it, brought in more colors in my own pattern. This is Antibes by Jenny Atkinson, and I modified this pattern adding the cuffs to match this gorgeous skirt which my mother-in-law Pipapo sewed for me. She's my partner in crime and everything, and my inspiration for, you know, knitting and sewing, and she's an amazing fiber artist.
Thank you, Leah from Sunnyvale, California. I've been following Leah for quite a long time, in fact, since I joined Ravelry, and that's because she's often knitting designs that I'm thinking about knitting. For example, the Honoured that she was wearing, the purple, lovely purple jacket right at the beginning, I've had my eye on that design for a long time and have been wanting to knit it. And I also really relate to Leah's love of making herself high fashion clothing. I can remember my mother, who lives in Australia, she came over to visit 2 years ago to Germany, and she and my daughter Madeline and I took the train from Frankfurt to Paris, and we spent 4 days in Paris together. And one of the things that we did there was visit all of the fashion houses, and I totally loved Coco Chanel. It was just wonderful to go in there and see these, get up close to these beautifully constructed garments, to see how much detail and how wonderfully they were made, the gorgeous colour tones that they put together, really unusual. It was such a treat. And we went there in August, and August is a wonderful time to visit Paris because I shouldn't say this, but all the Parisians have left. They've gone on holiday. So the city's really calm.
Yeah, August is the real summer holidays time here in Europe, and everything just stops. And I think it's very strong in France that everyone just disappears.
Yeah, so it's wonderful. It's calm. You don't have these long lines to get into museums and things. And when we went to Coco Chanel, we were the only people in the building, apart from a few sheiks and their wives, Saudi sheiks, and they were buying up big time. We weren't. We couldn't afford anything, of course, but we just enjoyed ourselves so much looking at these beautiful clothes. And then a very attractive, beautiful dressed man came up to us and offered us some freshly squeezed raspberry juice. And I was thinking that it was going to cost us something like 20 euros a glass. And my mother piped up and said, "Oh, yes, please." And I was kicking myself afterwards because, of course, it was free. It was just part of the beautiful surroundings and the service. So I missed out on freshly squeezed raspberry juice.
So that was actually sponsored by the sheiks.
Yes. But it was great. You could go there. There's lovely couches, and you could sit and you can watch fashion shows or just walk around and see these beautiful garments. So I totally relate to Lee's love of making garments for herself. So thank you for your contribution.
Yeah, I noticed Leah likes the same sort of fitted things that you do.
Yes.
So I was wondering, did Leah actually do sewing? No?
I think she probably does, but she did mention that her partner in crime is her mother-in-law, and her mother-in-law made that lovely skirt, and she made a top with cuffs on it to go with the same kind of fabric.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
I saw that her mother-in-law was German.
Yes.
She said. And I also noticed that Leah said that she was lining some of her stuff.
Yes. So she must sew. Yeah. But so, that's a great idea too, to be able to line an inside of a jacket.
Yeah. So very much a technique episode we've got today.
We do. Yeah. We do. It's under construction now, dealing with Andrew's hiking jacket. And the wool for it is from the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. And we've just received a lovely Christmas card from them.
Beautiful Robin with his real winter coat on.
Oh, he looks totally beautiful.
He's looking so fluffy in the snow there.
It's a Christmas card, but there's a little message saying, "Andrew, keep going on the hiking jacket. It's coming together very nicely. And we look forward to seeing you wearing the finished article on the Fruity Knitting podcast."
Yeah, that's so cool. Thank you very much to the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust.
We are going very soon to Snowdonia for a much-needed holiday. We're going to be hiking during the day and knitting by a log fire and drinking scotch or wine by night. So we really need to get this jacket finished for Andrew.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you go back to episode 1 of our show, it starts out, we all start out on top of Mount Snowdon in the snow, in the real wind and cold. So I absolutely want to have this jacket to wear there this year.
Yeah.
So we have to get it finished. And we've actually got an approach to sort of spread the work around. If you look back to our interview with Donna Smith, who is the designer of the barbel hat and a Shetland knitter and designer, she talks about the way they used to work on the Shetland Island way back when knitting was done as a real job. It wasn't a luxury thing. It was a source of income. And they would split the work up amongst the family, and the men did something. But the kids...
they sometimes use the knitting machines.
Yeah. The men are always getting with the toys. But the kids were used to do the simple knitting. And what Donna says in that interview is that the haps, right, so the big shawls that they made and sold, were made so that the middle was often quite simple and the intricate work is done around the edge. And so the kids will be given the middle bits to knit, okay? And they did the simple stocking stitch or whatever that they could manage nicely. And then the garment would be handed over to the more experienced knitters to do the detailed bits around the edges. That's the approach that we're taking here. So
put it on and let's see what we're doing.
Yep.
Well, Andrew's getting a lot of experience in knitting and purling. And I have sewn up the seams for him.
That's right. Where's it going?
And I will insert the zipper for him. I've just bought a custom zipper. in the same colour, which is cool.
Amazing colour match there.
So that's going to go here.
Yep, so the bits are coming together. You can see the right-hand front is finished. The back was the first part that I did. Now working on the left-hand front, and Andrea's sewn it up so you can actually see what it's heading towards.
And Madeline has just told me that for Christmas she's going to knit Andrew one of his sleeves.
Yeah.
As a Christmas present.
Yeah, I've never been given a sleeve for Christmas before, so she's good with present ideas.
She is great.
As well as she is really good.
She's really good, and she'll do that sleeve very well, and she's really good at changing her gauge accordingly.
Yeah.
So I'll give her Andrew's knitting and I'll say, okay, keep your gauge consistent with Andrew's.
Yep.
And she does that. So she's going to knit you a sleeve. You've just got a sleeve to go. You've a few more rows here, decreases on for the shoulder, and then I'll pick up the stitches for you around here. You can just knit up your collar. I'll insert the zipper before we go off, and you'll have this in no time.
Yep.
But he's doing really, really well.
And we've got little inspirations on all this work. We've got my bit of Intarsia here, and I always think of Bluey, who showed us his Intarsia work in Knitters of the World on one episode. We've got our techniques here.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the idea for this different colour came from Stephen, and then Diane was in with several good tips on how to do that.
Absolutely.
All in our show notes somewhere. So, yeah, it's cool.
So it's a design really that has been very helped along by our viewers. So thank you for your input. So, and let's just show your lovely work here. So that's Andrew's Intarsia.
Beautiful.
Work there.
There is the collar.
The collar
which
issue.
is a bit of an open question.
That's right. So what I did here, what I've done for it is I took the schematic of another jacket, a simple jacket with a upstanding collar and a zipper, and I just adjusted it all to be the mathematics of it for the yarn that Andrew was using and his gauge. But then I know...
And my shape.
And your shape, that's right. Yes. I've made it slightly V-line.
Triangular.
Which you can actually see in the Intarsia section. You can see that it's smaller here than it is up there. So I've very slightly increased it because Andrew is slimmer around the waist and broader up around the shoulders. What I did notice, though, is that the schematic that I was using did have quite a deep cutaway on the collar, which I'm not so happy with. I should have looked at that closer because it means it comes down here. And I was really wanting to copy a typical hiking fleece jacket and have a collar that's a little bit like this. So it would be upstanding and close to his neck, and in stocking stitch, and have this peekaboo colour here again, which I think looks really smart. But the way this design is, they've got it quite low, so, and then they've got their collar in a 2x2 rib, so it lies flat on the collar bone first and then goes up. So, and I think I would have to do a 2x2 rib to make that work nicely. I don't think it's going to work in stocking stitch. What I do love about this is I love the crisp line, that when you change colour, you get this crisp line when you're doing stocking stitch. If you're doing a 2x2 rib on the pearl, you'd start seeing a little bit of one colour and a little bit of the other, so you don't get this lovely line, which I think gives it a sporty look. So either I will do the collar completely in the purple or completely on the outside in the grey and just have the purple in the inside to make it soft against your neck. So I have to decide that. Yeah, so that's coming on so well.
Last week we had our second Fruity Knitting Live event, and our guest on this occasion was Lynn Mandeville, who we met in episode 16. Lynn was a really great guest. She is a lot of fun. She's totally passionate about her colourwork knitting and is also very much an expert on Shetland wool. And in fact, she has decided to start distributing Shetland wool, so the Jamison wool, starting from January. So very shortly.
Or end of January, I think. I'm not sure. But you can see that on her if you look up Fiddlesticks.
Yeah, very shortly. If you're in the US and you're after nice Shetland wool, which is what you want to have for Fair Isle knitting, then it's definitely worth getting in touch with her. She knows a lot about the wool itself. She knows a lot about the colours. She'll be able to help you, and it's
I think she uses it almost exclusively.
Yeah. So that was a really fun event. Lynn is a really nice person. She's just great to hang out with. Easygoing, very humble about her work. So that was really lovely. Our next guest, so for our January live event, our next guest is going to be Deborah Newton, who we're going to meet very shortly. Andrea's mentioned already, Deborah's an expert on fitting and finishing. She has a huge body of knowledge on knitting, so that's going to be really exciting too. But that's coming up. So the interview is coming up shortly. That's the live event for our Shetland patrons next month. On the patron side, we will mention the production of this show takes a lot of work. Andrea puts in heaps of effort in preparing for interviews, in gathering guests, discussing topics, doing the interviews, doing editing afterwards, putting the pictures in, the whole lot of it. To keep this going, we need some financial support, and that's what our Patreon page is for. You can find us at patreon.com/fruityknitting. Have a look at that. See if you are able to support us. We would really appreciate that. And we need this support if we're going to keep this show going.
And thank you to all of those who have supported us. We really appreciate it.
Yep. Always thank you to those who are in, and in general, thank you to our viewers.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. We're up to From the Archives, and I'm going to show you a knit that I did about 14 years ago from my daughter. And it's from this book, Great Knits for Kids, by Debbie Bliss. It was published in 1997. It's full of fantastic designs that range from quite difficult to very simple. For example, there is a lovely little garter stitch coat in it. Here, garter stitch jacket, very easy. To some, quite difficult cables, and I'm trying to find, there's a lovely Ferrar design in here somewhere. And the style of them is that they're very large, sort of oversized garments. You can see that one there. See how it's very, very big. The advantage of that, though, if you knit something big for your kid, it's going to last a long time. And I think that attracted me to them. But they're absolutely gorgeous designs. This is also a gorgeous design with a little sort of flowery collar. So the one I did was a cabled tunic with shawl collar. So I'm going to ask for your hands again. So here it is here. It's just a drop shoulder, easy construction with a lovely garter stitch shawl collar, and around the edging she's got this lovely bobbles all around here and also on the hem there. And so you've just got panels of this is a little panel of garter stitch with a bobble every few rows, and in between that are panels of cable stitch, and there's a little bit of garter stitch in the middle of these diamonds. So I'm looking at it now and I'm thinking that it actually looks relatively easy, but I can remember it being quite difficult at the time. I think it was all the bobbles.
Yeah, you have always seemed to have a bit of trouble with bobbles.
Have I?
Well, I can remember you having trouble with bobbles on another occasion, so...
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. And I just noticed here too, there's this lovely little split. And what
it's very stylish. I can't remember. Did Madeline think she was great in this, or?
I think she was too busy playing. She didn't really care.
Yeah, we were probably lucky that she didn't lose it on the way home from school or something like that.
Yeah. But what I loved about the design is that it's a tunic and the sleeves don't have any cuff on them. So I think this is knit for a 4-year-old, but I think she wore it already as a 3-year-old, and I would have just turned up the sleeves like that, which still look all right. And then I think she wore it till she was about 5 or 6 because there's no cuff on it. So it could be a little bit short on her and she could have a skivvy underneath. And there's no waistband, so that can go from being quite long to up around the waist. So it lasted many years. And I think I did it in a superwash because she was quite rough with her clothing and she was just interested in playing. I looked everywhere to see if I could find a photo of her in it because she was such a cute little kid and I couldn't find one. So that's unfortunate.
That's shocking.
Yeah.
That's shocking.
Our daughter's a bit of a funny girl because she really doesn't have much interest in clothes at all, but she does do modelling. So what she does do, and she has taken a few of my garments when she's gone off to a photo shoot, taken some of my garments with her, and then at the end of the photo shoot, she's asked the photographer to take some photos of her in the garments. And so I'm going to put some photos up here for you to have a quick look at. And unfortunately, they look more at her, so you don't see a great view of the garments. But I'm really proud that I get these professional photographs of my knitting.
Yeah.
So I hope you enjoy this very quickly. So I think we're now up to our interview with Deborah Newton. And Deborah is very interesting. She was an accomplished sewer before she started doing knitwear design, and she also studied costume design. And I think to start off with, she spent a few years simply knitting swatches from Barbara Walter's Encyclopedia of Knitting Swatches. Mm-hmm. And then she started designing. And so she has accumulated a wealth of knowledge and experience in her long career in the industry. And it was a great privilege to meet her and to interview her. And she reminded me of some teachers that I've had in music, because I did a piano performance degree, and then I did further studies in voice. And actually I started playing the piano or learning at the age of 8 or 9. So in my life, I have had many, many teachers, both in piano and voice, on a one-to-one basis. And that's quite an intense learning experience and teaching experience. And I've also taught. I started teaching piano when I was 19. So I've had a lot of experience with teachers. And what I've learned is the really best teachers come from a place of very deep fulfillment. So they've achieved what they've wanted to achieve, and there's no sort of bitterness or frustration or hidden jealousies, and all they want to do is pass on their wealth of knowledge and experience and skill that they've spent a lifetime accumulating and developing. And so they often behave towards their students in a very generous and kind way and manner. And that's what I've noticed through that the best teachers have in common. And I've had teachers for many years, very different teachers, and in different countries as well. And Deborah reminded me of these good teachers. She's a very kind, generous individual who has got a lot of accumulated knowledge, and she's put that knowledge in her 2 books, which she's recently published. And it's her gift really to the next generations of knitters.
Yeah.
So enjoy the interview with her. I think you will.
I had a look at the book Finishing School, which I think is a cool name, and they're both really great names. I read the first couple of pages, and I was just struck by the density of information in that book. You know, she gets right in. I think she's been a very active learner, and I think it's beautifully written and just gets across so much knowledge. I read the first couple of pages, and she's got a whole section, a big section on swatches, which I loved, because she goes into just how much you can do with your swatches, and she talks about how she keeps them, you know, the bigger, putting it in different parts of the project. They're like a mini version of the sweater that she's designing, she says. I thought that was really great. She also makes the point that you need a big swatch to get a good measure of your gauge, which I think is a really valid point. That's always something that I've thought as the beginner knitter around here.
And mathematician in the family.
That's true. I mean, when I was at university, I did a whole subject on measuring, and so that struck me. You need a big space to get an accurate measure. So I will mention, and I'm allowed to mention this, Andrea, you said that you've done some singing. In the interview, you will get to hear a little bit of Andrea's singing. Somewhere Over the Rainbow is Andrea performing. That's from a recording that we did some years ago now, but enjoy that around the interview. We're going to say goodbye. We are heading off on vacation. We're not sure exactly when we will record next. Yeah. We will be somewhat away from civilization, so we are not...
Very remote.
Yeah, we won't have a great internet connection. Not exactly sure what we'll be able to do there, but we will try to get something up. But I think we will say goodbye and thank you for the year. We've just hit 5,000 subscribers, which is really nice. Thank you for watching. To all the patrons, thank you very much for your support in that way. It's been a big year.
It's been a huge year for us. And so we're off to have a wonderful holiday, which we really need, mentally and emotionally, I think, which is going to be great. We're going to be doing lots of hiking. So Andrew's going to wear his hiking jacket.
Yeah.
That's going to be great. And yeah, hopefully we'll record something and be able to put something up, but it does depend on the internet connection, as we said. Yeah. But we wish you a wonderful Christmas and Advent time with your family and your friends, and good cheer and lots of merry eating and drinking and fun times. And thank you for being with us throughout the year, because some of you have been with us right from the beginning, and thank you very much for your support. That's been great. So have a lovely time, and we'll see you soon, and enjoy the interview.
Happy and safe Christmas. We look forward to seeing you next year.
Yes. We might see them before.
We might see them before.
Okay, bye. Welcome to the Fruity Knitting Podcast. No matter how well you knit or for how long you've been knitting, if a sweater doesn't fit you perfectly, you won't see it as a success. And my guest today has a wealth of detailed knowledge in two important areas that many knitters have trouble with. That is finishing techniques for their garments and making sure their garments fit their bodies perfectly. So Deborah Newton is my guest, and she's been working as a freelance knitwear designer for over 30 years. Deborah also worked as a technical editor and a designer for Vogue Knitting, and she's the author of two brilliant books which addresses those two main knitterly problems. Her first book, Finishing School, was published in 2011, and then in 2015 her second book, Good Measure, came out. Deborah, it's a real privilege to have you on the podcast with us today, so thank you for agreeing to coming, and a warm welcome to the Fruity Knitting Podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, Andrea. It's a pleasure to talk about my favorite aspects of knitwear and maybe inspire people with a few tips that would be helpful for them in their own knitting.
Absolutely. A lot of what you teach and write about in your books comes from your own self-taught knowledge. So can you start with some background details, emphasising the key things over the years that have helped you develop your craft and your garment making mindset?
Well, I have to say right off the bat that people think that I was born knowing these things, and I wasn't. I knitted garter stitch squares for about 10 years before I became a serious knitter. And the event that kind of catapulted me into my deep interest in knitted fabrics and knitted garments was encountering the Barbara Walker trilogies. Well, there are actually 5 Barbara Walker pattern anthologies, which include all kinds of knitting patterns from knit and purl texture to cables, lace. And when I encountered those as a very basic knitter, I realized there was so much there that I could experiment with and play with. And so I started knitting swatches, and I worked my way through those pattern books and trying the different patterns, such as things that I had no knowledge of. How do you make a cable? How do you do a slip stitch pattern? How does a yarn over work? So these were very exciting things. Also, I came from a sewing background, which sometimes sounds daunting to hand knitters, especially if they're not sewers. But that was inspiring to me because I had an early experience in how garments fit together, how the pieces of them work together. And that became very important for me to understand when I was making garments for people of various sizes. And since I worked in theater as well when I was out of college, I found out that not everybody was a model size. We often fitted very large people, tall people, people with greater girth, sometimes very tiny, small people. So these experiences, both in theater and in sewing, led me to understand a little bit more about how garments fit and how they're put together. I always remember one very tall man that I had to make a waistcoat for, a 17th century waistcoat. And it was amazing to me that those principles that went into fitting this historical garment also could have been applied to a knitted sweater for somebody of that size. So my antenna were always up. I was always looking at how garments fit people and how they appeared to look on them when they were wearing them. I'm always still now looking at people on the street and saying, what does that measure? What is that great length? How does that width and length of garment work to make such a unique look? So that was always something that was in my own personal life. And then in the 80s, when I began designing, I was gifted in order to learn more by being invited by the editors of Vogue Knitting to go into New York and work as a technical editor for a while. So there I got to see garments of different sizes and shapes, and people worked in materials that I wasn't familiar with. And so that was a door that opened for me so I could say, oh, so that's what this kind of fiber, a mohair alpaca silk blend looks like, and in a worsted weight, how it drapes, how it falls. And all of these experiences, took me from being very unfamiliar with knitted fabrics and garments to some degree to becoming more attuned to what made them special, each unique. So I guess it was kind of a beginning knowing nothing but garter stitch and moving on to learning a little bit about everything.
Because you've accumulated a lot of detailed knowledge, and particularly in two important areas that many knitters have trouble with, and that's finishing techniques for their garments and making sure that a garment fits really beautifully. And your first book was called Finishing School, which is a fantastic name, I think. And you've got a real passion for beautiful finishes on garments. So could you tell us a little bit about how that passion started? And then from your years of working in teaching and workshops, give us a couple of examples of common problems that knitters have with finishing and your best advice for them.
Unfortunately, what happens with poor finishing, or finishing that isn't even poor but is suitable, is that when we look at a garment that has something just a little bit off, our eye always automatically goes to that spot. If someone that shows you a jumper or a sweater that they've made, and there's a little space between the buttons that's pulling, no matter how beautiful the fabric is or how incredibly beautiful the design is, your eye always goes to that little imperfection. And so for me, I was always very aware, because my designs were going to appear in print, and I didn't want anybody's eye to go to the error rather than the whole of the garment. So what I did was I started to become very careful about my finishing, and I realized that it made a huge difference in the way the garment was put together, and in the way the garment fell and draped, and also in the way that the garment was perceived. So it became more and more important to me, Andrea, over the years, as I started to see what an impression that made, both on editors and people who wore my sweaters. I like to think that when a garment is finished, it has a moment of absolute perfection. It looks as perfect as it ever will look, because what happens is after the garment is worn, it gets a little soft, or it stretches a little bit, and that gives it its character and its wonderful handmade quality. But I like to participate in that moment of perfection because there are so few of those moments in life. So I enjoy working up to the moment where I've done all of the finishing on a garment I can do, and it's an absolutely perfect shape. So I always encourage people to seek that moment of perfection for themselves too. I also believe that people are often daunted when they see the finished pieces of their garment before they put them together. Often they have, wiggly edges. Sometimes one edge seems looser than the other edge looks. And people feel overwhelmed sometimes. And I say, take that moment and look at everything that you've done, make sure there are no errors, and then start carefully and systematically putting the garment together. And what I like to think of is all of those edges that seem so imperfect and kind of daunting in the beginning become held together by the perfect finishing, a perfect seam or perfect button bands, neck bands, anything that allows that knitted fabric to have a firmness at its edge. So this is what I like to call creating the boundaries of a garment. So for those elements are, for me, creating a perfect seam, making sure that if a garment has extra weight, it's strong enough at the shoulders for that garment and the fabric to fall without stretching, creating a perfect button band, sewing on the buttons in a beautiful way so that when the cardigan opens, there are no loose ends showing. We would like our garment to look as perfect inside as it does on the outside. So a couple of the things that people I know find very daunting about finishing is, first of all, seaming seems to be very challenging. And people often like to do garments in the round because they don't have to do seaming. But sometimes that limits you, because not every design that you might want to make is made in the round. And even though you can adapt that, you occasionally want or are drawn to a garment that has seaming. So what I always say is, always seam with the right side of the fabric facing. And that way you can see exactly what the garment is going to look like from the right side. Very often people will say, well, Deborah, I sew from the inside. And I say, well, how will that let you know what the garment will look like on the outside? So for me, that's a very strong suggestion that I make to everyone. And in my book, Finishing School, I show exactly how you can, insert the needle in a easy and simple way so that from the right side, you can see exactly what's happening. Now, I also like to do a little bit of steaming occasionally. So if I were going to do some seaming on something that needed a little steaming, perhaps I would do that to flatten the seam a tiny bit. But basically, when you seam perfectly, you very often don't have to do any blocking or steaming. I think that people are somewhat daunted by zippers. And zippers, for me, are some of the most exciting details that you can add to a sweater, because there are plastic zippers with interesting colored teeth, and there are metal teeth like the sweater here that I have. I love the glint of teeth when you see them in a zipper. And zippers are so easy to insert, and I'm always encouraging people to, use that special detail. As you can see here, I've used a zipper that's very, very easy to go up and down. And what I've done is I've prepared my edges before I sew the zipper in, so that very often I'll pick up a row of stitches along an edge that's going to have a zipper, and I'll bind them off. And that gives me a little bit of a trim, and I'm not sure you can see it here, but often it's a contrasting color. And then I have the main fabric of the knitting right next to it. So when I pin my zipper in place, I can sew in the little dent that's formed between the fabric and the edging that I've picked up. Now, some people might notice too that various edges of their garments, of their pieces, are sometimes different tension. You might be tight at the beginning of a row and loose at the end. So this side of the knitting might, this front piece, looser edge than this front does. So when you're picking up and binding off, you can be careful to make both of those edges be the same by your careful bind off. So I find that that's a tip that allows people to use a zipper and insert it in a very simple, straightforward way. When I pin my zipper in place, then I can just hand sew, and I like to go straight up and straight down. I don't do a running stitch. I find that it gives much less pulling if I go up and down. And soon, if you've done it a couple of times, you can do it without even thinking.
And do you use the sewing machine at all?
I don't, Andrea. I could, and many people do, but I'm a hand person by nature, and rather than a speed person, so I would always choose handwork over machine work. Now I just want to look to the inside of this. You can't really see, but because I've sewn the zipper with the same color thread as the zipper itself, when that opens, the hand sewing that I've done doesn't show. It doesn't pop forward, if you know what I mean.
Yes, that sounds great. Andrew is knitting his first garment, which is a hiking jacket, and we're going to put a zipper in it. So we're definitely going to use those techniques.
Neat, excellent.
Yeah. So your latest book is called Good Measure, which is another brilliant name.
Well, I can't take any credit for these great names. My editor, Tricia Malcolm at Vogue Knitting, is always has a clever...
She's a wordsmith.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So this school is great, but Good Measure is wonderful too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was published in 2015, and it covers 3 major topics in really good detail to make sure a knitter's garment is going to fit them really well. And those topics are, so the first one is measurement, using schematics and correctly measuring the body. And the second one, understanding garment shapes and how they look on the body. And thirdly, how to fit the knitted fabric to the body shape. So are you able to take some examples from your book for each of these 3 topics and talk in a little bit more detail?
Yes. And let me say, Andrea, before I even begin, is that I wrote this book over a long period of time, first in my head and then on paper and, in terms of my computer. But thinking, how is it that I could make fit suggestions for a full range of body types that we all are? And it seemed to be a topic that was sorely needed. People in workshops asked me, well, I made a sweater, it didn't fit, so I never made a sweater again. I only made shawls and accessories. And it seemed sad to me that people felt lacking in confidence about their ability to make a garment fit, especially since, number one, materials are so expensive. Number 2, our time is so valuable. And number 3, after enjoying the knitting itself, to put together a garment that was less than satisfying it seemed like such a cruel thing to me. I really wanted people to have success in this area. So first of all, I realized that everybody's measurements are different. And I don't mean just girth, I mean lengths and as well as widths. And the various parts of our bodies too, so that somebody who might be what we call average size might have greater girth in their upper body than someone who is finer boned. And a sweater will fit in a different way based on those measurements. Even though people might look very much the same, their measurements are quite different. So it's important for us to learn how to take proper measurements and refer to them. Secondly, I said to myself, I always relied so much on schematic drawings, which are the charted out shapes and pieces that represent the the sweater that we're going to make. And I thought to myself, why can't we make a schematic that represents our bodies? And that way we can compare whatever schematic drawing of a sweater that we're going to make with the body that we have, so that those measurements can be compared and almost even overlaid if you're using tissue paper or tracing paper, and allows us to see where a pattern would have to be altered in terms of making it fit us better. Another thing I realized knitters don't do is they don't really know the measurements of the sweaters that fit them well. And this is something that's really, really interesting. You don't even have to look at sweaters that you've made. You can go to your closet or your dresser drawers and take out garments that aren't even sweaters and measure them and get a feeling for why does this garment, which measures, say, 48, fit in a different way than this sweater that measures 42 inches. And I'm speaking in American terms, of course. How do we learn from the garments that fit us well so that we can, when we go to choose a pattern, find a way to better choose the initial pattern and then move on to actually alter it to fit us well. So that was one of the big revelations that I had, Andrea, was how do we represent our own body so that we can compare it to garments that fit us well, and in that way choose a knitting pattern that will fit us well with alteration.
Absolutely. They're fantastic tips, to take something from your closet that fits you well and measure it and then compare that to what you're doing.
If something measures 26 inches, I don't know how we would translate that without my calculator to centimeters, but do you know what that looks like, so that when you see a pattern and it measures 26 inches long, is that something that's flattering to you, or do you know about yourself that you prefer to have something that's 28 inches long?
Yeah.
So just knowing these little things about ourselves and our own taste, kind of identifying those details, really makes a difference in terms of choosing a pattern. But the next step, which is even just as crucial, is to learn what there is to know about different garment types. And this I had a knowledge of from working in the industry, and also, as I said, being a sewer. But lots of people don't realize the differences between the iconic, what I call the iconic garment shapes. There are really only a few different kinds of ways that garments are put together. And once you understand those different garment shapes, which I describe in the book in detail, then you start to say, oh, well, if that sweater is this kind of garment, then I will be able to adjust it for me by doing this. So the garments that we know, let me just quickly go over what those iconic shapes be. You know, all of us are familiar with the most simple kind of garment that dates back to ancient times, and that would be a T-shaped garment that just has no shaping whatsoever. It's just a basic kimono would be this kind of garment, or something that just had square or rectangular pieces with a square rectangular piece for sleeves. That can be what we call in sweater form a dropped shoulder garment, because there's no armhole shaping. So the width of the body connects to a long rectangle, and very often that seam falls over the top of the arm. So where do we go from there? Then we have what we call a cap sleeve, or a modified cap sleeve, where we have a little bit of shaping around the armhole and at the top of the sleeve. And in this sweater, we can see that too. We have the armhole is curved in, and the top of the sleeve is shaped in an upside down U shape in order to fit into that armhole. So that cap sleeve style is a very common type of garment that we see in woven and knitted fabrics. And what it does is it's the shape that most closely conforms to the body itself. So we have a curve where our arms meet the torso, and that kind of garment replicates that kind of shaping. Now, we also have, and you can see that when you have a cap sleeve, it doesn't connect to the neckline at all. It's basically at the side of the body.
Yeah.
But those of you who've knitted for some time or are a little bit familiar with garments know that there is also a style called a raglan, which has a diagonal seam that goes from the underarm up towards the neckline, and the top of the cap of a raglan actually contributes to the shape and the width of the neckline edge. So when we're designing or when we're thinking about making a sweater, knitting a pattern that's a raglan, we want to make sure that that neckline edge measures what we measure in that area, and that the raglan seam is in the appropriate place for the body type that we are. When I started writing Good Measure, someone said to me, Deborah, raglans can't be worn by women with large busts, women who have more girth in the upper body. And I thought to myself, how can that be true? What I realized was if the raglan line cuts across visually and from a comfort point of view in a negative way across the bust line, then for someone who's larger in that area, we want to simply make that line be less of a 45-degree angle, if you know what I mean, and make it veer more towards the vertical so that, yes, indeed, a woman who is larger in the upper body can wear that style just by altering her pattern to give her more material across the front of the sweater.
And that would also be good for broad-shouldered women too, wouldn't it?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. You know, it's funny because I always consider the measurements in the upper body to be more crucial towards good fit than the bust or the hip measurement. Everything hangs from the upper body. Armhole depth is very important. We need enough room to move around. We want a neckline that has enough ease to accommodate us. And we want to have a cross shoulder and a cross back width. All of these measurements that add up to the upper body are so important for good fit. So these, and then the last kind of garment, which is, pretty much typical of knitting as opposed to sewing, is a kind of, it's not the last, it's one of the types. It's a circular yoke pattern, which has no seaming. And it is, we're reminded of the Icelandic traditional sweaters that have patterning around the yoke, but we also see, as I did in my book, we can have lace patterning or a different kind of pattern that goes around the shoulder. If your measurements are not the same measurements of the pattern in that area, you might have to widen the pattern a little or narrow it just to make that work for you. And lastly, Andrea, I wanted to mention the dolman sleeve style pattern. Iconic garment, and we see many patterns that use this shape and size. And it's a sweater that has very little shaping close to the body and a lot of extra fabric in the underarm area. Those basic shapes by adding ease or taking away ease, all garments in the world are basically made from those 5 types of iconic shapes. And sometimes knitters don't realize that once you understand those 5 shapes and how they work on your body, which I try to explain in my book, then it makes choosing a pattern and altering it so much easier.
That's fantastic detailed knowledge. So thanks so much for that.
My pleasure. There's one more thing I want to mention, Andrea, and that is that knitters will learn from reading my book that you have to also analyze from your swatch, from your knitted fabric, what the characteristics of that fabric. Is it drapey? Is it furry? Is it thick? Is it stiff? All of these things contribute to how a garment fits us.
Yes, and you were saying earlier that sort of fluffy fabric will stand away from the body more and finer fabric will lie closer to the body, won't it?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, well, that's great detailed information. So we've got 3 more questions to go. And so can you tell us very quickly, what's your best advice for the inexperienced or timid knitter?
Learn on your own terms. This is what I like to suggest to people. If there's something you don't know, set aside a special amount of time every week to explore that. And I always call this jokingly, and it isn't really a joke, the self-directed course of study. Although we're making sweaters and patterns, what is there that we don't feel comfortable with? Can we go once a week and try a pattern stitch that we're not familiar with and do it for several weeks in a row? And then in another month, have another topic that we self-direct ourselves towards. This expands our knitting knowledge, and it actually helps us with everything else that we do in knitting, finishing as well as garment making.
That's so true, and it also helps people just get over the initial fear barrier of something new, doesn't it? Because you're constantly going there in a quiet way.
And non-judgmental.
Yes.
And making a mistake is just a bump in the road.
That's great advice. So now, what about for other designers? What's your best advice for designers who are working in the industry, because you've had many years working in the industry and you've had to produce a lot of high quality garments efficiently and quickly? So
yes, and very often I have 2 weeks to 3 weeks to design a garment and have it made and do all the finishing myself. So what I do is I rely heavily right at the beginning on a really big, beautiful swatch. I always say the swatch tells the story of the sweater to come. If you have the opportunity to knit a beautiful fabric and work some edgings on it and perhaps even test a collar, you can work out all of the details ahead of time in a very nice, tight little experiment that allows you to feel confident when you move forward. Since I work with other knitters to knit the pieces of my sweaters, even though I do all the finishing myself, I want to test out everything first in swatch form so that I can write an instruction for that knitter who will then, in a sense, check it for me as she goes along.
for example, you would do a swatch for the button band or how the edging of a band would fit on, or for a neckline.
Yes, say I had a V-neck and I was unsure of how the miter would be when I did the big button band on the neck. I would do that first in a little swatch form so that I didn't have to do it and rip it out. I don't like to rip out. So I do all my testing ahead of time, and I think it gives me a more pleasurable experience in my finishing when I know where I'm going. I don't have any ambiguity in my mind, if you know what I mean. I've already solved all the problems ahead.
Yes. And are those kind of swatches things that you would send in when you're sending in a design to a publisher?
Absolutely. So when my swatch has this little story, and editors love it. When I work in print and I send a design to a magazine and the swatch has everything on it, they always say, "Oh, Deborah, we always know what your sweaters will look like because the swatch tells the story."
Thank you so much. I'm sure it's wonderful for young and up-and-coming designers to hear from you, who's had so much experience, good tips for them to help them in their trade. So one last question. Can you share with us any exciting news or plans that you might have in your immediate future?
One exciting thing that I'm really looking forward to next year in 2017, Andrea, is I'm working with my friends at North Light Fibers and on Block Island, which is off the coast of my home state of Rhode Island in the U.S. And I'm going to be giving a 4-day design workshop, taking people who are interested in design, maybe people who are already designing, and helping them create a process for themselves that work from the first initial analysis of the yarn, through swatching, through sketching, through being able to write an instruction and a schematic and create a schematic drawing for the design, onto a final pattern so that they feel confident in having a process that works for them. So it's going to be an exciting and pleasurable island experience, New England seaside town, along with learning me sharing some of my experience over the years with people who are not as experienced as myself.
I'm sure that would be wonderful. I think already established designers would get a lot from that, but also people like me who like to alter patterns, who see things that they like but want to change things around or experiment on the side. That would be so useful.
I'd love for you to come.
I would love to come. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
It's been you, Andrea.
A real pleasure and privilege to have you share your knowledge with us, and I think the viewers are going to be very, very grateful. So all the best with your future workshops. And I've got both of your books. I totally recommend them. I think they're fantastic. And they're beautifully put together as well.
Yes, thank you so much, Andrea. I appreciate being here and being able to share just a tiny, tiny little bit of what's in those books.
Absolutely. I can totally confirm that. We've only gone over very briefly the depth that's in the books, and that's wonderful. So maybe there's room for another interview sometime in the future.
Thank you.
Okay.
I look forward to it.
Well, we'll say goodbye now. So thanks again.
Bye. Thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure.